Hi there folks, Josh and I the First here again with another Exade replay coming to you with episode 7 of Kamen Rider Exade. Let's get right into it. I know a lot of you don't know me very well, but I can't tell you how incredibly happy I am that we're at least this far into the series and they haven't relied on stupid very much. I know that's a very broad thing to say, but I'm very happy to see that we are still pushing forward with plot. Everything is still very well paced, very well told, and that's very evident here in this episode. So let's talk about what actually happened. So first let's go over our patient. Our patient is an older man who has a daughter. They both work together at a factory. Apparently he's worried about the factory, she's worried about him, source of stress, yada yada yada. We're used to this by now. Basically he's the holder of the viruses for this episode. Now the interesting thing to see here is that much like the last few episodes, he has two of the new gashats that were developed by the GENM Corporation inside of him. These two being Giri Giri Chanbara and Jet Combat. These of course being the next level 3 power-ups we're going to see for our riders. Now once he's admitted to the hospital, we actually get a fight there inside the CR, which is interesting to see that they would actually bother to have a fight there and not actually take it outside, but they cover this. Hiro's dad reminds them, hey, you guys can't fight in the hospital, that's kind of a no-go, so they decide to use the scene select to go ahead and remove themselves from the situation. Now I find that kind of interesting that they decided to do that, because for any of you who've seen the recent Marvel movie Doctor Strange, it's kind of the same concept as the mirror dimension there in that movie, when they remove themselves from the actual place that they're existing in to another plane. I guess the scene select does act as another plane of existence, for lack of a better way of putting it, then nothing in the hospital is actually getting hurt. I think that's a very interesting mechanic that they're deciding to use here in the show, and I'm wondering if at a certain point there is a way for any fight that happens in a scene select area, if that will cross over into actual reality, but we'll have to see about that later on. Bigger story here is revolving again around Kiriya Kujo, Kamen Rider Laser. Now this would focus more on his episode because he's going to be the recipient of the Giri Giri Chanbara Gashat, which will allow for him to reach his level 3 kind of humanoid form. Now, for those of you who aren't familiar with it, Chanbara refers to kind of like sword fighting and samurai style, so that makes sense for his particular motif when he's there in the level 3 form. And when he does reach this form, he's armed with something called the Gashakon Sparrow, which is a combination sickle, bow and arrow type weapon. Now this is very familiar to some Rider fans, going all the way back to Kamen Rider Blade. Interesting, that's another Blade throwback to Kamen Rider Kadi Sir Chalice, or however you want to pronounce his name, who had a very similar weapon there. Another thing that's interesting to point out there for Laser in this particular form is his face. Now you might be looking at it saying, well yeah, it's kind of stuck out, it's a little weird to look at, but if you look at the outline of the shape, the symbol that it makes there is very similar to the symbol of another Agito from Kamen Rider Agito, who notably would have been the first of the Heisei series to be a doctor and a Kamen Rider. Let's go back again to some of the fights for this episode. Again, very well paced. And the first fight there at the hospital, which then got transported to the rocky seashore area, we see Hiro and Emu jump right from level 1 to level 3. Emu had it in a little more humorous way, whereas Hiro's was very quick and to the point, you know, the level 3 form covering his body very quickly. And then later on in the Giri Giri Chanbara fight, we see that he's a lot more capable. Of course, it's easier when you have arms and legs instead of wheels. But overall, the biggest thing to take away from this episode is the problem that Kiriya Kujo has now as a result of learning the identity of Kamen Rider GENM. Now, we learned earlier that GENM is actually Kuroto-dan, the head of the GENM Corporation. Apparently from a few episodes back, Kiriya saw this and has been holding on to that information to use at just the right time. The bigger problem here stems from Kiriya's own personality. He seems to be the kind of person who is a habitual liar, but the reason why he does this is most likely because of past trauma. Now to elaborate on that, we find out that the supposed lie that he told earlier in the episode about a friend having died as a result of the bugsters is true. He's just been lying about certain other things because maybe he just doesn't want to admit it to himself because it actually really hurts. So to clarify this, what seems to have happened is that Kiriya's friend had contracted the bugster virus. When he was told this news, he didn't take it very well, and supposedly, now this seems to be the way they're presenting it, ran out and accidentally was hit in a traffic accident. Hiro finds this out because this is what was actually reported on a medical report, so it doesn't seem like he's telling the truth, it's just a portion of the truth. Now the thing about this is, people do this all the time. People do tend to kind of stretch the truth or omit certain things because they think it'll hurt others or it'll hurt themselves if they actually admit to what's going on. But here for Kiriya, it creates an even bigger problem when it comes to trust and liability. When it comes to trust, the writers of the series will eventually have to work together to defeat the Bugsters. That's kind of a given. But when it comes to this specific situation, Kiriya has already presented himself as somebody who's willing to omit, stretch the truth, or outright lie, and that makes this harder for the other writers to believe him. The crux of this problem appears when Kuroto-dan is outed by Kiriya as being the identity of Kamen Rider GENM. Now earlier in the episode, Graphite and Palad had some disagreements about what exactly was the best course of action in dealing with the Kamen Riders, but here at the end, they come up with a cover-up. After Genmu is hit with Kiriya's finisher, Palad steps in, puts on the belt, and holds the Gashat to lead the other writers to believe that he is the identity of Kamen Rider Genmu, some other character that they haven't been introduced to just yet. Of course, the result of this now is that Kiriya is dumbfounded. He knows what he saw, he knows exactly who the identity of Genmu is, but the more important thing, nobody will believe him now. And that's exactly what Genmu and the other Bugsters want. So down the road, this is actually going to be very interesting to see how it plays out. Genmu, rather Kuroto-dan, knows that Kiriya knows his identity. It's one thing to discredit him, but two, he's a liability. He's the only person who knows the truth now, so there's kind of a target on his head. On the other end of things, the other writers who might have just thought about trusting him can't now. Hiro outright doesn't trust him one bit, and Emu is still kind of disturbed that he thought he had a partner here, somebody he could trust, but now he's not so sure. But by that same token, Emu is a very notable character for the kind of person who believes in other people, believes in his patience, wants to believe the best in people, so I think he might not entirely buy it. He seems like the kind of person who will go ahead and dig in there and see what's really going on. Why are you actually saying this? Why are you lying at all? And maybe we should have believed you in the first place. This also leads to another interesting thing to think about. When Kuroto-dan is outed as Genmu, Poppy immediately says, no, there's no way it could be him. But Poppy comes from the Genmu Corporation, doesn't she? So does she actually know? That's an interesting thing to think about. And of course, Exade, Brave, and Laser weren't the only writers we were dealing with this episode. While all of this is going on and the Giri Giri Chanbara has been given to Kiriya, on the opposite end of town, Snipe has been trying to get the Jet Combat Gashat with little success. But of course, this will feed into next week's episode when obviously he does get it and he reaches his level 3 Jet Combat form. Now from the preview we see he's going to seem to want to fight the other writers as he has been up to this point, but now we're going into some interesting territory here. What's going to happen when the playing field's been leveled again and everybody has a level 3 form? Does Poppy actually know what's going on? And what's going to happen to Laser now that nobody trusts him and basically nobody's got his back if Genmu comes after him? This is a very interesting, very good place to be at for a story like this. So what did you guys think of this episode? Did you like the way that the action played out? Do you think Giri Giri Chanbara is a little too bulky? Do you think Poppy knows? Does Genmu have a good plan, or don't they? You tell me in the comments below. And of course, you can always talk to me over on social media. On Twitter, I'm at JoshKnight1st. This has been another Exade replay for Episode 7, The Essence of Some Lie. I'm Josh Knight the First, and I'll see you guys again next week.